All In Sports Network. We love sports.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Ben Peck here on another episode of All In Aggies. Today we are going to be taking a look at the most up-to-date college football playoff rankings. Texas A&M pretty much staying put at number 15. We'll take a look at what that means moving forward. What is the Aggies' path to the college football playoff? Basically, is it not just Atlanta or bust, but is it SEC Championship or bust? Is it top 4 or bust for this team? Could they survive a 10-3 season? We talked a little bit about that last time, but we have a little more data now. We're a little further into the season, a little less wiggle room for some upsets. So we're going to take a look at that. Plus, we'll touch on just different tie-breaking scenarios as to who the Aggies could face in Atlanta should they take care of business. And then just a quick note on National Signing Day. I've been a little busy running around myself, capturing all our fantastic local high school athletes, several of them going to the Division I level, and of course, many signing on with Texas A&M. So we congratulate all the future Aggies in the chat who are checking this out, and I'll give you a team that really impressed me. We've known about it for a while, but made it official, and just a team to watch out for down the road. But let's start with the big discussion at hand. College football playoff rankings. By the way, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. We're about halfway to our goal of 1,200 subscribers by the end of football season. We've still got, if you consider the magnitude of the football season, I'd say we're just past the halfway point. So I guess we're right on track, and you guys have been awesome. All right, let's break down these playoff rankings. My takeaways from what we saw on Tuesday. There you see on your screen, this is a courtesy of a screen grab from Greg McElroy, so shout out to him. And of course, a lot of discussion, the top 5, Big Ten dominating, and we talked about this last time. Big Ten in a really good place because not many of those top 5 teams play each other. Ohio State plays all of them, but aside from that, Penn State, Indiana, Oregon, they all avoid each other for the rest of the season. Big Indiana-Ohio State game coming up this weekend. That will be very telling for me, and we'll touch on that in just a bit. After that, you've got, as far as the top 4 seeds, BYU, Miami falling. We'll touch on them in just a bit after their loss to Haynes King and Georgia Tech. So big shout out Haynes King. And then you see some of the SEC at-large bids after Notre Dame, or right before Notre Dame, Tennessee, and then you've got Notre Dame. And then back to the SEC, Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia as the number 12 team, but just on the outside as Boise State has the edge by virtue of being a Group of 5 champion. Then SMU there on 14. So keep in mind, Texas A&M is basically 15, right outside of all that. So before we go back to it, just my baseline takeaway, I am still nervous that A&M needs to not just beat Texas. I think that's a given. They need to run the table to feel, for me, to feel like remotely at ease. Obviously, if they win the SEC, they would be in. But I still don't know if 10-3 is going to get you what you need, especially considering the fact that the Aggies did, in some ways, they challenged themselves with, Notre Dame. And, South Carolina's coming on strong. By the way, I think you need South Carolina to be continuing to be a lot better and improve over the course of the season. If they finish 9-3, I think that goes a long way to helping you out. But you've got wins over Mizzou, which now doesn't look as sexy as it did. LSU, which looks pretty good. And then obviously you'd have the win over Texas. So 2 things that are going to stand out to me is how much do they leapfrog people after what we saw, some other teams do. We saw Ole Miss do with Georgia. How much will a win over Texas help in that regard? And then how much are they going to punish teams that are hanging on by a thread if they lose, if they stumble, a la not so much BYU, because you're going to probably get a Big 12 champion in there either way, but especially in regards to Indiana, Ohio State, what have you. So we'll go back and we'll bring it up. I want to try to look at the past rankings, or just I'll have it up here off screen for me to reference just to see again, kind of measuring up how people moved relative to what they were last week and the results that we saw play out. All right, so Oregon let's just talk about the Big Ten. My fear, and this whole take, by the way, is not really a take. It's more just a prognosticating on a pessimistic scenario for Texas A&M's chances. Okay, let's say, for the argument, Oregon and or Ohio State. Let's say Ohio State knocks off Indiana, and then Oregon, Ohio State, they duke it out. I would assume those teams would be in if you're talking about a 2-loss Ohio State team and or an Oregon team with 1 loss. I guess it could get interesting. All right, I'm sorry. A 2-loss Ohio State team with the loss being to Oregon in the Big Ten Championship. And then Indiana 1 loss, Penn State 1 loss. Would they knock any of those teams out? I don't think Penn State can fall anymore because if they win out, I mean, they're where they are. I don't think you drop them. The question will be Indiana. If they lose and their only loss is at Ohio State, do they fall all the way out of the top 12? I think that would be a little harsh, and I would be surprised to see that happen. Now, having said that, again, to reference teams that lost last week and what they did, Miami fell by 5 spots after not just a loss, but their only loss. Georgia fell by 9 spots after their second loss, which did come to a good team. So if you want to be the optimist and say, hey, Indiana, even if they lose to a good team, the rest of the resume is not impressive, they could get shellacked. I think there's something there to be said. So could A&M pass Indiana for good, even with the loss in the SEC championship game? I think it's feasible. It still makes me a little nervous. But again, let's just say for pessimist's sake, those 4 teams more or less are in, barring some crazy upsets, because I think that is a decently likely scenario. That leaves the next highest seeded team at the moment, Texas, number 2. Now, would they be in if they had a loss to A&M? I will remind you, literally last week, Georgia was ranked number 3. They lose to Ole Miss. Now they are number 12 on the outside. Now, that was Georgia's second loss. So am I saying Texas is out of the playoff with a loss to A&M if they win all their other games? No, I'm not saying that. But could A&M pass them for good, even with a loss in Atlanta? I think that's feasible, conceivable. So, but again, it makes me nervous because I think Texas is probably in the field either way, even if they lose to A&M. I would be not shocked to see them still make the field of 12. And then you go down the list, Tennessee. Now, Tennessee's an interesting one because I think Tennessee and Georgia are going to basically take care of each other. I think the winner of that game is alive, and I think the loser is out and cannot recover. I mean, certainly Georgia with 3 losses, Tennessee with 2 losses, but you've got really nowhere else to climb or nothing else to really magnify your resume at that point. So I think the winner of that game will take care of the other one. And I think that'll be an opening, but like, let's just assume Tennessee wins and they stay in it. So it's not really an opening. It's just like, you're not going to see Georgia and Tennessee crash the party. Notre Dame, I think they'll be in as long as they win out. They don't lose to USC or Army or something like that. Go back to BYU. BYU, I think, is just pencil in the Big 12 champion. And I don't know about where the seeding is going to be. I've seen some discussion that maybe, if they fall to Colorado, maybe Boise State actually becomes that 4th best conference champion, gets the bye, but then Colorado sneaks in or somebody else from the Big 12 sneaks in to the field of 12, but they're in that first round of games. That could happen, but I think BYU, think less of them specifically and just think of them as the conference champion spot. Same for Miami. They're in there with SMU, in my opinion. I think one of them will be in. One of them will knock the other one out. Maybe Clemson, I guess. I don't know if Clemson's mathematically alive, but that's the scenario I see there. And then Alabama, Ole Miss, very winnable the rest of the way. So I don't see either of them really being left out at this point, which the part of all this that concerns me is you talk about, again, if Ohio State beats Indiana and Indiana has 1 loss, Penn State has 1 loss, Oregon is either undefeated or has 1 loss to Ohio State, and Ohio State only has 2 losses, another one to Oregon, I could see all those 4 teams being in if they win out. Texas losing to A&M, I could see them staying in potentially, asterisks. We'll talk on that a little bit later. Tennessee, I think it'll be them or Georgia. Notre Dame, I could see them staying in. Miami, the ACC champ. BYU, the Big 12 champ. Alabama, Ole Miss, Boise. So I kind of see a scenario where you wouldn't really take anyone out unless you had to say A&M, by virtue of winning that game, does indeed take out Texas. Because, again, you look at what Georgia did. They went from 3 to 12 after losing to Texas. So could Texas go into that game as the number 2 team in the country, number 3, and then they lose and they're 2-loss and everyone else is rising up? Potentially. I mean, I don't know that you see anyone dropping. The other pathway I see for A&M, which I'm not sure of because they seem to be very high on these Big 12, these Big 10 teams. I don't know how much of it's by virtue of being undefeated, but I think it's either you take out Texas or you take out Indiana. But the part that makes me nervous still is, let's say you win against Texas and you are ranked higher than either Texas, Indiana, or both in that final regular season poll. Are we sure that A&M is going to be solidified enough that a third loss would not slip them behind? I think Texas would be a little bridge too far because the head-to-head, but Indiana, over a one-loss Indiana team that didn't go to Indianapolis versus a 3-loss A&M team. Again, just by the metrics they seem to be taking into account, they seem to be very big on the win-loss, and they do seem to be punishing these losses big time. Like, again, Miami falling several spots, Georgia falling 9 spots. I want to look LSU falling 7 spots after a loss to Alabama. Now that one was pretty lopsided, but then again, Alabama, see, this is what makes me nervous. Alabama, after dominating LSU at LSU, moves up 1 spot. So I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. Obviously, you've got to beat Texas to have any chance. I think that goes without being said, but would the Aggies be blacked out if they don't win in Atlanta? A little too close for comfort for my taste. Again, it's really, for me, it comes down to the fact that those Big Ten teams don't play each other. If they did, this would all be sorted out. You would have 1 or 2 of them out. Maybe you get Ohio State and Oregon, and then maybe one of the others. Like if Indiana also had to play Penn State, then that's like another eliminator game between Indiana and Penn State, but they don't. So, or if they had to play Oregon, or both of them had to play Oregon, then that would be great, but we don't get that scenario. So that's kind of where my head's at. I think, we'll really have to see how far out A&M is to that point before the Texas game, and then how much credit you get for beating what would, in their mind at the time, be a top 2 or 3 team. And let me just say too, I've seen a lot of discussion about, like, how is Texas justified a number 3 seed? And like, I get it in the abstract. I'll just say to the counter, I always say this with like people who are surprised that A&M basketball is like ranked as high as they are, either at the beginning of the season, whatever. Like, I understand they have flaws and I understand they have problems, but if you're not going to rank A&M 13 to start the season for men's basketball, for example, then that means you have to show me 13 teams that are better. And again, not to say A&M is like a top 15 team, what you would have pictured in your mind, but if you're a skeptic of A&M basketball in this analogy, like, okay, well, who would they be below? Like, that was like A&M being ranked to start the year this year. Like, I understand, like, there's a lot of questions with A&M being a top 20 preseason team, but there's a lot of questions about a lot of teams, and that has definitely proven to be true this year. So Texas, they have a very soft schedule, and it is what it is. They got a little unlucky, I would say, with the fact that Oklahoma ended up being a total dud. They had some games that were already going to be easy. Michigan, obviously, like, they scheduled what should have been a tough game, but didn't turn out to be. So I get it, but I really think when you especially when you look at the top 5, I think the top 6 really with BYU there. I get the sense that the committee, no matter what they say, is really placing a high emphasis on kind of your standard win-loss, base win-loss records. So, Texas's worst loss is to Georgia. Tennessee's worst loss is to Arkansas. Notre Dame, Northern Illinois after them. Miami, Georgia Tech after them. Notre Dame and Tennessee at least have some good wins mixed in there too. So that's where I'm at with that. We'll see. I'll put it this way. If A&M goes into, let me know in the comments what you think too. What ranking would A&M need to go into the SEC championship game for you to feel confident that they would not be knocked out without a loss? Like if they go in ranked number 6, you feel good that a loss isn't going to knock the Aggies out. If they lose to Tennessee or Alabama, and we'll touch on that in just a second. Or if they come in at number 9, do you feel that good? Number 10, number 8? What's your cutoff of where you would feel confident that win, lose, or draw, the Aggies are going to the college football playoff? I'm not talking dropping seeding. I'm talking falling out of the top 12 altogether. And really remember, the top could be the top 11 when you consider the 5 conference champions auto bids. Now, moving on to that SEC championship game, possibilities, scenarios. If you haven't already, by the way, subscribe to the channel. We love your support. Help us make it the best we can. All right, let's break down this look right here with these different SEC scenarios. So what you see on your screen is basically, and I gave A&M the win over Texas because for this argument, we're looking at who A&M would play in an SEC championship game. This is what you would probably have as the most likely results for the remaining SEC games the rest of the way. The one that's maybe you could flip, maybe not the one that you could flip, but the one that gets the most interesting is this weekend on your left. If Tennessee beats Georgia, it would be Tennessee A&M under almost any scenario because, they both have one loss. It'd be the only one-loss SEC teams. Now where it gets real interesting is where it is right now, what you see on your screen. These games going the way they are expected. And by the way, I don't know why they have it this way, but the teams on the left are at home. So you're not asking for any crazy, tough games on the road for these teams to prevail. I think Mizzou's probably out of it anyway. I'm looking at that with Mississippi State. Maybe Alabama to Oklahoma. We'll touch on that. But in this scenario, it would be A&M and Alabama. Don't ask me how. Don't ask me why. Basically, like combined strength of schedule within the SEC. So if these results held, it would be A&M, Alabama. And if Tennessee wins against Georgia, if you switch just that, it's Tennessee A&M. For it not to be Alabama, and I believe after them it would be LSU, you would need Alabama to slip up somewhere. So I don't know where you think is most likely. Those 2 games left for them in the SEC, at Oklahoma or home against Auburn. Do you put your faith in, hey, Iron Bowl rivalry game, anything can happen? Or do you say, you know what, on the road, Oklahoma, tough loss to Mizzou. That was a crazy game, but a crazy loss to Mizzou. They should have won that game. The defense can be tough. Maybe Jackson Arnold finds just enough plays. Weird stuff has been happening this year. Does that put them over the top? I don't know. I don't know if it does. To be frank with you, I don't know. So those are your scenarios. It's really A&M, Alabama, if everything else holds, or A&M, Tennessee, if Tennessee beats Georgia, and then A&M, whoever else, if Alabama loses, or if LSU slips up somewhere too. Then it can get crazy. But let's just focus on, really, those are probably your 2 most likely scenarios at this point, with, I guess, a slight caveat that if you want to say, okay, if there's any other scenario that's the most likely, LSU would be the 3rd most likely team that you would play in Atlanta should A&M get there. And, of course, for them to get there, they have to beat Texas. They have to win out. I guess technically the New Mexico State game doesn't matter for SEC purposes, but you understand what I'm saying. That is kind of the SEC championship game picture. And then remember, back to our discussion about does A&M stay in with a loss in Atlanta? Keep in mind that's who you'd be losing to. So you'd be, in that scenario, you'd be losing to either a Tennessee, which has beaten Georgia. So maybe Tennessee is floating around, and you've beaten Texas. So maybe in this scenario, Tennessee's floating around 4 or 5 with one loss. I mean, maybe up to 3, and then you lose to them. Or you beat Texas, and Alabama's maybe floating around 6 with 2 losses, and you're in there with 2 losses at, again, what's that number? 10, 9, 8. And then you lose that third game, you slip a little bit. Again, I'm not wishing that on A&M. I'm just saying I don't know if it's a guaranteed lock to move on if you lose that SEC championship game, which is exciting in some ways, but nerve-wracking in others. It's almost like top 4 or but. I don't want to say bust because, again, we don't know. I need to see how far Indiana falls. That's really what I want to see. I want to see how far Indiana falls should they lose to Ohio State or Ohio State. If Ohio State loses, because let's be honest, they did not look great against Nebraska. They have not really played anybody in non-conference. And then they've got a win against Penn State, and they would have lost to Indiana in this scenario. Ohio State maybe tumbles big time if they lose. So how much does Ohio State or Indiana fall? That's what I'm going to be looking for this next week. All right, lastly, before I let you go, it is National Signing Day. As I mentioned, I went around talking to a bunch of our high school athletes in Central Texas, talking about them going on to the next level. I wanted to give a quick update on a team that, as far as A&M goes, caught my eye with several impressive signings, and a team that we should pay attention because, again, on this show, let me just get ready for this. Let me get this pulled up so I don't do it. I want to do this justice. Listen, we don't just talk football here. We don't just talk basketball, baseball, softball. We talk about anyone who's capable of winning an SEC or national championship, and we want to let you know about it before it happens. Keep an eye on A&M women's golf. They just signed the number 2 class in the country, according to Golf Week. They've got the number 1 recruit in the country, Scarlett Schrimmer, by the way, a former Texas commit. The number 4 recruit in the country, Natalie Yen. The number 5 recruit, Bryn Court. Every time I see her on Instagram, she's winning all sorts of stuff. And then Avery Zweig, a top 10 recruit in the state of Texas. And remember, after this year, you're still going to have Caetana Fernandez Garcia Pogio came in as the number 2 player in the world amateur rankings as a freshman. You've got Vanessa Barovalos from Canada, who's been good as a freshman this year out of Canada. So you've got pieces to build around. These ladies are building something special. And you should check them out, by the way. They're free to go to. If they're not in College Station, they're all across the country. They're all across Texas a lot of times. Usually they're in Dallas or Houston or both at some point. It's a good workout. You could see some of the best players in the future of women's golf. So check out these ladies and support them while you can. I would urge you to. It's fun. And just real quick, honorable mention to our national champions, women's tennis. They signed a top 15 recruit in the country, top player in Texas, Jennifer Jackson, who is also the sister of A&M pitcher Luke Jackson. So keeping it in the family, and excited for her, excited for those ladies, what they can do. They're building a young squad. They're going to lose, Mary Stoyana, but they have a lot of experience coming back next year to build around. They're going to lose Jeanette Morales as well, but they've got young players ready to fill in. Lexington Reed's a promising freshman. So if you're curious about, hey, I know they won a national championship, how they're doing since, how they looking, what's the future like? Is this like a one-year blip? No, I think this is a team that, again, certainly could contend for an SEC title, maybe national championship implications. But again, that's our goal here. We want you to know, if you're an Aggie fan, and I want to know about the big sports that have a lot of people in the stands. I want to know about those, but I also want to know what's going on with championship contenders at all levels. You come to the right place. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. I think it's down there. Subscribe right under my name there. And like the video. Again, comment How do you feel about the rankings? Do you feel nervous that A&M is 15 with 2 losses? Because again, if you go by, just to tie a bow in this discussion, if you're going by the resume and everything else, you could make a case. Hey, A&M's got 2 losses, one at South Carolina, who's rising, and then one at home against a playoff team right now, Notre Dame. They've gotten some quality wins as well. So are they really, and their resume is worse than SMU's right now. Really? Like, so I worry about I know the resume and the strength of schedule and that argument. I'm worried that is not at this moment taking the day as much as it's like tears of like, well, we'll factor that in a little bit, but you have to have a really overwhelming set of circumstances to pass up a team that has fewer losses than you. I'm worried that is playing a big factor. So again, like the video if you enjoyed the show. Tell a friend, tell a neighbor, tell an Aggie. Comment, let us know how you feel about the playoffs, how you feel about who you'd rather face in the SEC Championship game. Would you rather see the Aggies take on Alabama, Tennessee, someone else, praying for a miracle to play LSU again? Or just your thoughts on, I don't know if you have any thoughts on National Signing Day for any of our other programs at Texas A&M that we follow. So be sure to do that. Subscribe as well. Thank you so much, and we'll see you back here later on this week.
All in Sports Network. We love sports.